Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Matthew, thank you very much for joining us once again. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Great to be with you.
Always great to be able to reconnect with you. Let's begin with the issue of the Department of Justice and the Biden-era regulations that clearly lean, or at least the allegations, clearly lean towards anti-Christian bias.
Yeah, so for those who may not have been following this, there have been concerns for years about potential anti-Christian, anti-Catholic bias by members of the previous administration. And so a task force had been created. The name of it was a task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias, a rather leading name, I have to say, that essentially examined the work of potential anti-Christian bias throughout the federal government. And what this did was actually to look at 17 federal agencies on the task force, as well as other agencies. And what it did find in this 200-page report is that there was very clear religious discrimination. And essentially, what the report tries to detail is to note and examine how the previous administration pushed what it describes in the report as a, quote, radical policy agenda, even when its actions infringed on Christian beliefs, free exercise, and on matters of deep personal importance to nearly every American: life, family, marriage, self-identity, education, medical decisions, and more. So it includes about 1,100 footnotes, and what it adds to is an additional 300 pages of various exhibits.
There were a lot of Catholics during the Biden era had noticed what appeared to be very clear bias, and now we seem to see policy bias at the level of policy. What are we to think of this?
Yeah, well, I think the report, when you actually go through it, it's a fairly impressive record of what it tries to document. As the executive summary says, when Christian beliefs about morality and human nature conflicted with the Biden administration's views, religious rights often suffered. It notes, again, quoting from the report, that the administration generally tolerated religious beliefs that were privately held, but as it writes, zealously pursued actions to limit Christians' ability, as it writes, to act in accordance with their faith. Now, this is the two things that are worth immediately noting in reviewing this overall report. The first is how very similar this was to the idea of a real clash of what it means to have religious freedom. Is it the freedom of religion, or is it the freedom of worship? In other words, this takes us back in some ways to Obamacare, the so-called the contraceptive mandate and other things that the government at that point tried to impose. Are we allowed to have religious freedom in the public square, to live our faith publicly, or are we simply reduced to freedom of worship? In other words, we can have our religious freedom, but it has to remain within our houses of worship or synagogues. That's one major question. The second one that becomes clear in this report is how ideology was clearly clashing. That we had members of the previous administration who were distinctly committed to an ideological position, and it seemed to color almost all of their decisions relative to dealing with those who held a contrary view in their worldview on important matters such as LGBTQ issues, abortion, contraception, and other things.
There was also the great issue that you've already lightly touched on, which was the massive stretching of the FACE Act. Are we going to see such an occurrence take place in the future now that this is being reported?
Well, I think you're asking a really important question, Marcus. So in this report, that it talks about the, quote, weaponization of the government against Christian, including, as you say, the freedom of access to clinics entrances. That's the FACE Act. And we always go back to what will be, I think, an ongoing issue to continue discussing, and that is the now infamous decision on the part of the Richmond office of the FBI to investigate so-called radical traditionalist Catholics, which left many people really quite stunned that Catholics who adhere to a certain traditional mindset or are perceived to have that mindset were subject to close scrutiny and investigation as potential domestic terrorists. The question that I know is being put to members of the Department of Justice right now is, okay, what steps are you taking to make sure this never happens? Now, in fairness, the Biden administration rescinded that report and claimed that there was no intent for bias here. But I think it's a very fair question. And what follows, I think, is what tasks they're going to put for themselves, what barriers are going to create to prevent this from happening again. Because, as you know, elections have consequences, administrations come and go. And as we have seen in various places like Virginia, the movement from one administration to the next can be absolutely stunning in how swiftly the ideological limitations that were placed under one administration are lifted, or new limitations and ideological mindsets are imposed by an incoming one. So elections, as I said, can change things very quickly.
As we talk about social situations changing quickly, let's switch gears here to talk about the Vatican preparing for the summit on marriage crisis.
Yeah, this is a really interesting story to me because it tells us a little bit more, where we're getting more information, for example, about what Pope Leo's vision for bringing the church together looks like. I say that because he announced that he would be bringing the heads of the Episcopal conferences around the world to Rome in October to discuss the place of marriage and family life. But here, instead of sort of nesting it within the overall structure of the Synod of Bishops or the Synod on Synodality, he sort of set it off by itself. And now, in preparation for that, he has organized a very specific study group that's going to meet shortly in the Vatican under the title of the Sacrament of Marriage, Faith, and the Munus Docendi. So in other words, that's the teaching office. And I think it tells us that Pope Leo, as is his habit and his tendency, is to gather information, to listen to everybody, and then to make a decision. So I think this is a significant event that will be happening, or has happened on just this last week in what they call the Casina Pio, the fourth, under the Dicastery for Laity, Family, and Life. And that, I think, tells us a lot about his concern about family life in the modern world. And it ties in some ways to even the DOJ report we were just talking about, that we have very radically different conceptions of what family life and what marriage and what relationships look like, depending upon your ideological worldview. And I think the more we can talk about fostering a strong family life, marriage, and understanding what it means, I think the stronger we'll be as a culture and as a civilization.
It's no surprise to anyone that marriage, especially even within the Catholic sphere, has undergone quite a crisis. It's really heartening to see how Pope Leo XIV is eager to respond to it. And do we know anything about the kind of response that the presidents of bishops' conferences have about this summit thus far?
Yeah, I think as we're seeing and saw with this study group that was brought together, there is, I think, great interest on the part of Episcopal conferences to look at this issue. Everyone sees the marriage gap that has been created, the fact that when we look at Gen Zs, they have grown up in a very secular environment. Many Gen Zs have grown up in families that are divorced, that are the product of cohabitation. So they're seeing this not simply as an overall pastoral issue. I think they see this as a real cultural issue, and the two of them have to go together. And from that standpoint, I think we can also see the concern that Pope Francis had. Now, here we are on the 10th anniversary of the recognized controversial document, Amoris Laetitia. But when you actually read the whole of Amoris Laetitia, these are so many of the concerns that Pope Francis had as well.
My guest is Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We've just spoken about, firstly, a report that shows clear bias in the Biden administration DOJ against Christians, and then after that, about the summit on marriage crisis that Pope Leo XIV is hosting in the Vatican. Continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Matthew, let's shift gears to some happy news. Father Augustine Tolton and the shrine that will be honoring him in the Diocese of Springfield, Illinois.
Yeah, this is another one of those great stories because obviously we have heroes in the history of the church, and Father Augustus Tolton is one of them. And I'm excited by the fact that we will have a new shrine that's been funded. And part of the fun of this is that we have the announcement of a formal shrine. And what this is essentially the shrine for Father Augustine Tolton. Now, for those who may not be familiar with him, and I would encourage everyone, you really need to be, he is the first Black Catholic priest born in the U.S. Now, there are other names often associated with that, but we know that his priesthood is verified in church and civil records, so that's an important aspect of this. And essentially, there will be plans to create a shrine in his honor, and it will be St. Boniface Church in Quincy, Illinois. And it's the first recognized shrine for this holy and, we can say, venerable priest. And so this announcement by Bishop Thomas Paprocki of the Diocese of Springfield, I think, is welcome news for all of us who have followed his extraordinary life. And have certainly done everything we can to encourage his cause. And as I said, he's now venerable. So that was an important step, too.
This Father Augustine Tolton and his life is such a demonstration of how God can work the extraordinary in one who is seemingly extremely ordinary in the eyes of society. Can you please share about his great legacy?
Yeah, so again, for those who may not know him, he was born into slavery in 1854, but his mother and his siblings were able to escape across the Mississippi in 1862 to Illinois, which was a free state, part of the North, of course, and they found themselves in Quincy. And there, as an altar boy, he attended St. Peter's Catholic School and felt a call to the priesthood. And just what is a sad reality is that no American seminary at that point would accept him because he was a Black. And he ended up, with help from various priests and others, went to Rome to study. And there he was ordained. He assumed that he would have to go serve in Africa as a mission, but instead he was sent back to the United States, and there he served in Quincy. So as Bishop Paprocki made the point, he said he overcame so much slavery, racism, various forms of prejudice, and he served as a priest, as an extraordinary person. He died, unfortunately, at the age of 43 in 1897 and was buried at the St. Peter's Cemetery in Quincy. He was especially renowned for his preaching, his singing, and his absolute dedication to the priesthood. And his cause was opened in 2010 by the Archdiocese of Chicago, and he was declared venerable in 2019, which means that his heroic virtues were recognized by the church, and now we would await the confirmation of a miracle that could lead to his eventual beatification.
It's also worth noting that no American seminary would take him. No seminary in the United States would take him, despite the fact that he was serious about his call to the priesthood. So even as a nation, we have come a long way in the cause of, in this case, the recognition of the dignity of the human person.
Yeah, I agree. And we can note, too, here we are in the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, that it was an unfortunate reality coming out of the Civil War, that the efforts to evangelize among what were then post-Civil War, the recently emancipated slaves, became a contentious issue. As how we were going to devote those resources. And I think, personally, I think it was something of a missed opportunity for the American Catholic Church to evangelize among them. But having said that, we have had so many extraordinary women and men in the history of American Catholicism, from priests to lay and bishops and cardinals, all the way down to lay people, who worked so hard to achieve all of the equality that we have to have. And from the civil rights movement to opposition to Jim Crow, opposition to the Ku Klux Klan, all of it, to where today we can stand and proudly ask people to help contribute to build a shrine in honor of Father Augustine Tolton. So, as you say, we have come a long way.
And praise the Lord for that, and leading the charge in that area of conversation as well. To shift gears, tell us what's happening in Catholic Charities of Miami.
Well, one of one of those sad stories that we're seeing, and it, every administration has its own set of priorities. So one of the realities is that funding has been stripped, and we need this funding, obviously, for the good work that we do. And so I know that this has been the source of some pain on the part of the Archdiocese of Miami, that the funding for a lot of the work that Catholic Charities does in that region is simply not going to be there. So I think let's see what sort of appeals can be made for refunding, and unfortunately it comes on the heels that they basically have to cut 80 employees after funding was cut from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, basically $11 million in federal contracts that served families and vulnerable children, including unaccompanied minors. That's the choice that has been made budgetarily, but the reality is that we can only hope that that funding will be restored.
We can keep praying for that. I just want to make sure that we get this last piece in before we run out of time. Pope Leo XIII's legacy and space.
Well, I'm glad that we can end on a happy note.
A happy note of galactic proportions.
Exactly. Honoring a truly great pontiff, Leo XIII. So the Vatican Observatory has named 4 asteroids after various figures in history. Among them now is Pope Leo XIII. He's notable because he essentially reestablished the institution of the Vatican Observatory in 1891, a year that, of course, we always associate with the promulgation of the monumental document of Rerum Novarum. And the asteroid in this question is Gioacchino Pecci, in honor of his birth name, Gioacchino Vincenzo Pecci, who, of course, went on to become a cardinal and then was, in 1878, elected Pope Leo XIII. And his decision to reestablish the Vatican Observatory for 2 basic reasons. One, the light pollution in Rome was creating all sorts of problems. So it's difficult to have an actual observatory in Vatican City State. But also, in the wake of the loss of the Papal States, this is an opportunity to recommit the Church. Not that we ever would not, we've always been committed to it, but to recommit the Church very publicly to the pursuit of science. And of course, one of the great lies told about the church is that we were enemies of science and progress.
Mm.
And so here we have the Vatican Observatory that does such remarkable work in exactly the same way that so many great scientists have been Catholic over the centuries.
Matthew, my friend, thank you for sharing with us on the meteoric rise of Leo XIII in the life of the Church and his astronomical contributions to science and faith. My guest has been Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, and we've been talking about church news and my real joy at this asteroid being named after Pope Leo XIII. Stay tuned, I'm Marcus Peter.